Our friends were the friends of were the children of Roel Meyer and F.W. de Klerk. We competed in soccer, in rugby and netball matches against the primary school of Robben Island. And I did not, at that stage, engage the context in which my parents were operating or the roles the relevant individuals were playing. But as I grew up, my political awakening was a gradual process, and it was inevitable. And our returns to Krugersdorp every 6 months became political reality checks for me, away from the protected environment of Acacia Park. Krugersdorp was a mining community within which the fears of white Afrikaners and their resistance to the democratization of South Africa played itself out in the increased support for far right-wing groupings such as the Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging. And as the AWB support grew, in the face of the growing demand from black people for meaningful inclusion in the political life of our country, the demand was met with increased oppression and unrest and violence. And I recall at the time when the state of emergency was announced, such an unsettling experience for us living in Krugersdorp and being so fully aware of the battle which people in such close neighborhoods of ours have to be fighting to get similar rights, which at the time I couldn't even vote. I just knew that there was a huge responsibility coming along with this battle. In 1987, in that election, my father was the National Party candidate for Krugersdorp. And in preparation for this election, we canvassed the streets of Krugersdorp to get votes for this election, to win this election. And the opposition party's candidate was Clive Derby-Lewis. And when we won that election with 55 votes, I can honestly say it was a momentous occasion, because I saw that as a mandate which was given to the people from Krugersdorp, really intimidated by all of this change, to participate in the reforms and changes which were desperately required in our country. And it became clear to me, as I alluded to, that white South Africans with the right to vote had a responsibility in ensuring that South Africa became a home for all of us who live in it. And then I moved on to my university years, which I have to say, Wanzili, were not half as exciting as yours from a campus and political point of view. Because, you know, the Stellenbosch student politics at that time was finding its feet in the new democracy. It was our first democratic election. So I have nothing exciting to report on that side. But I have to say, our constitutional law lectures made up for all of that. And we were privileged to be lectured by lecturers who were participating in the drafting process of the Constitution. And we'd have huge debates with them about basic issues such as the death penalty and how that would play itself out in our community. And for that, I'm truly grateful. At the same time, at that stage, my father was busy with the process, assisting with the process of drafting the Constitution. And I was privileged to attend, for instance, the Paarl community meeting during which the various kinds of rights included in the Bill of Rights were discussed. And I also attended the General Assembly when the Constitution was accepted. And at that time, I realized that this Constitution of ours is an extremely powerful tool, but that its power and relevance will depend on the manner in which we use it, in which the citizens keep it a living document. And as I was writing this, I realized from moving forward and joining the Black Sash with its slogan of making human rights real was such a normal course of events for me. And for the first time in a while, I was working again in a political environment, and I have to say it was a kind of homecoming for me. But I was extremely privileged because I was surrounded with leaders, with women such as Mary Burton, who's here tonight, and Di Oliver, and Marcella Naidu. And their wisdom and leadership was so encouraging. And I now realize, upon reflecting on that stage, that I just learned so much through the examples they set. We involved ourselves with the campaign of a basic income grant, a comprehensive social security system, and greater regulation of the microfinance industry. And all our arguments were set against, for instance, Section 22 of the Constitution with respect to the right of social security, and extremely exciting, the Administrative Justice Act, which has just been promulgated. And my time in the Black Sash was an enriching one. My work there showed me how much the NGO sector and civil society can do with so little resources. And up to this day, as I'm working in business, I have so much respect for civil society because they do, at least all the time, try to change the world with such limited resources, financially and from a human resource point of view. So as I'm currently working in the business world, involved with philanthropy and the taxation and corporate governance related issues of non-profits, I carry with me these guiding principles which I collected with me as I've moved along. And I have to say, on a daily basis, as me and my colleagues grapple with the concepts of tolerance, diversity, intelligence, and transformation in substance in the business world, I can only see our country succeeding if we make a concerted effort to bring and address restitution from an economic point of view as well as a relationship point of view. Economic restitution will require of us to mobilize business in South Africa to fully involve itself and engage with the serious South African realities, such as income disparities, poverty, and leadership challenges we are currently facing. And business is required to play a coherent role in addressing these challenges and should be doing so beyond attending to corporate social responsibility initiatives and charity. But further, unless our involvement with economic restorative initiatives come with the approach which is evidence of truly accepting and respecting one another and an openness to our diversity, with an awareness of the impact we have had and still have on one another, this restoration will not be sustainable. And therefore, when I'm requested to give advice to the older or the younger generation, I prefer not to even go there. I'd rather just speak to all of us, including myself. And I think what's happened is during that September meeting, I heard someone from the floor making the point that young South Africans are without hope. And that is why all of this tension, it's part of the reason why we have the tension playing itself out on the campuses. But I think often us as a society, we have a kind of like maybe a bit of a self-esteem problem if I compare it to the Americans, which is very topical today. But we need to believe in ourselves and we need to have hope in our country. And we need to be the hope for one another. And on that note, I'd like to end with a quote, which I've been carrying with me for a long time. And it's a quote by Václav Havel, who was the president of the Czech Republic, and he delivered this at the 1990 Anatomy of Hope conference, in which he said, "I'm not an optimist because I don't believe everything ends well. But I'm not a pessimist either because I don't believe it ends badly. I just carry hope in my heart. Hope is the sense that life and work has meaning." And I think I would like to challenge us. So let's be each other's hope whilst we face the challenges facing our country at the moment.
In service of time, I'm going to do my own thing and observe all protocol by saying, I see you. And I see you and I see all of you. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you very much. I do believe that every generation is shaped by its time. And I also do believe that every generation must take responsibility for its time. I furthermore believe that you must respect your own story because if you can respect your own story, you will be able to respect the other person's stories, and you will be able to listen to the story. Now, I was blown over one day when the journalist Max de Prier said to me, that day when P.W. Botha appointed you as Deputy Minister of Law and Order, did you in any way foresee that so many years later, Nelson Mandela would appoint you as a Human Rights Commissioner? When I told this story, and I shared this story to an Irish audience, an Israeli person in the audience said to me afterwards, you know, in our country we are not so forgiving. You have to be thankful for that. Be that as it may, just a wee bit about myself. I am what the Americans would call the Americans that voted yesterday. Those people would refer to me as a baby boomer. And yet in the course of this election campaign, they said the baby boomers are in serious trouble because they are not as digitally advanced as the millennials. And Hillary Clinton, that other person who was also a candidate, you remember her? She was indeed trouble because she didn't know how to deal with the millennials. Now this old gentleman was fishing, and some of the youngsters walked up to him and said, sir, is it true that in your time you didn't have cell phones? He said, yes. No access to Google? Yes. No television? Yes. What a boring life. And he responded, you are right. But my generation invented those things. We are now looking at you to see what you are going to do with these things. So I'm a baby boomer, and so was Ellen Bussack, Barney Pitjana, Dikgang Mosenekti, all those people, and I happened to bump into them sometime or the other during my life. And I remember vividly a discussion I had with Onkopotso Tiro in the early 70s, saying, let's sit together at a round table and find a solution which is solitary and will serve our nation. And years later, as a Human Rights Commissioner, I sat with Barney Pitjana. I said, Barney, tell me something. Did this thing play itself out the way you had predicted? And Barney said, never. What about you? I said, not at all. He said, it doesn't matter. The one thing that matters is that we were not idle. We tried to do something at our time. Now, at that particular juncture, Jeff Butlander, Barney Pitjana, and myself were student leaders of 3 different organizations. We never met, not once as students. We met in the year 1999 when we were doing battle against the South African government in a under a South African constitution in the Irene Grootboom matter that had to do about housing. And for the first time, all 3 of us were under the same roof, on the same side, in a court battle, which Thabo Mbeki later referred to as that stupid case. Be that as it may, I don't claim anything in particular, and I don't want to talk about the battles I fought in the 80s, because I have discovered over and over and over again that millennials in particular don't want to hear of the battles gray-haired white man fought in the 80s. So I'm not telling you about that. Be that as it may, that is now the challenge of how do we deal with the situation, and I hope to return to that. Let me say, in conclusion, when the Constitution was agreed to, negotiated and signed on the 10th of December 1996, I will not claim that I wrote it, but I will claim that I had a ringside seat when it was written. There were 3 reasons why it was signed in Sharpeville. it was on the 10th of December. It was signed on the 10th of December because that was the day the United Nations had agreed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we wanted to signal to them that we were now in step with basic international human rights. Secondly, we returned to vereniging because it was in vereniging that a peace treaty was agreed to in 1902 with a specific provision that the political rights of African people would be dealt with at a later stage. And thirdly, it was to say to the people of Sharpeville that your struggle was not in vain. At that signing ceremony, I thought I had run my race, only to discover I had not run my race. When I served as a Human Rights Commission, I, for the first time, in spite of all this exposure and in spite of all this happenings to me, really what social justice meant and what it meant to live in indignity. In other words, to put it positively, what dignity meant. Now, I had made an appearance before the TRC, seeing that we're talking about intergenerational discussions. Let me tell you, to make an appearance in front of the TRC was not child's play. Why? Because you did not know what you didn't know. And you didn't know what it was you were supposed to know. And what is more, you didn't know what would you be asked that would make your children ashamed to say, is this what my dad had been up to all these years when he was not at home? It's a long story, and the outcome is another story for another time. But I think that was one of the failures of our generation. The TRC had to do what it had to do, but it was a terrible mistake to believe that the TRC was the end of the spirit of South Africa and South Africans. And South Africans reaching out to one another, and my English fails me, but massaging one another's hurt and pain. We had not learned to laugh and cry together. And we thought that would be taken care of by the TRC. And there was a life to be beyond the TRC. Now, contrary to the irritation of my peers, my peers, in other words, the ones that look like I look, and the ones that are as old as I am, and contrary to the friends that I saw and greeted here, I am inspired by Jefferson. When Thomas Jefferson says that one generation cannot bind another, and every constitution has to be reviewed at least every 20 years. And therefore, I'm saying you cannot wrap a constitution in wool. You have to expose it. You must not be afraid of it. You must not say the big questions were asked in the 90s and were answered in the 90s. That is wrong. I believe that the concept of constitutionalism will survive all those debates, but you have to face them. In that sense, I am, in spite of the fact that I'm a child of history, I'm more excited about the future than about the history lessons. And I am excited. Now, how do I go about? Sharp. I must wind up and I must speak to the mic, I think was the message. I think as a baby boomer in 2016, we have to master the art of how to look and listen. Not the popular look and listen that you'll find in the shopping malls, We have to look with specially polished glasses, and we have to listen with special hearing aids. If you don't do that, you will not be able to hand in hand move forward with the millennials. Thank you.